In Norse mythology, gods and goddesses usually belong to one of two tribes, the Aesir and the Vanir. Throughout most of the Norse tales, deities from the two tribes get along fairly easily, and it's hard to pin down firm distinctions between the two groups, but there was a time when that wasn't the case. The Vanir goddess Freya was always the foremost practitioner of the art of seidr, the most terribly powerful kind of magic. Like historical seidr practitioners, she wandered from town to town, plying her craft for hire. Freya eventually came to Asgard, the home of the Aesir. The Aesir were quite taken by her powers and zealously sought her services. But soon they realized that their values of honor, kin loyalty, and obedience to the law were being pushed aside by the selfish desires they sought to fulfill with the witch's magic. Blaming Freya for their own shortcomings, the Aesir called her Gullveig and attempted to murder her. 3 times they tried to burn her, and 3 times she was reborn from the ashes. Because of this, the Aesir and Vanir came to hate and fear one another, and these hostilities erupted into war. The Aesir fought by the rules of plain combat, with weapons and brute force, while the Vanir used the subtler means of magic. The war went on for some time, with both sides gaining the upper hand by turns. Eventually, the two tribes of divinities became weary of fighting and decided to call a truce. As was customary among the ancient Norse and other Germanic peoples, the two sides agreed to pay tribute to each other by sending hostages to live among the other tribe. Freya and Njord of the Vanir went to the Aesir, and Hörnir and Mimir went to the Vanir. Njord and his children seem to have lived more or less in peace in Asgard. Unfortunately, the same can't be said of Hörnir and Mimir in Vanaheim. The Vanir immediately saw that Hörnir was seemingly able to deliver incomparably wise advice on any problem, but they failed to notice that this was only when he had Mimir in his company. Hörnir was actually a rather slow-witted simpleton who was at a loss for words when Mimir wasn't available to counsel him. After Hörnir responded to the Vanir's entreaties with the unhelpful "let others decide" one too many times, the Vanir thought they had been cheated in the hostage exchange. They beheaded Mimir and sent the severed head back to Asgard, where the distraught Odin chanted magic poems over the head and embalmed it in herbs. Thus preserved, Mimir's head continued to give indispensable advice to Odin in times of need. With both Asgard and Vanaheim ravaged by the war, the factions found themselves locked in a stalemate. With seemingly no end to the conflict in sight, Odin's advisor Mimir was appointed to be the arbiter between the warring gods. Mimir eventually settled on a peaceful solution in which Odin would marry the Vanir goddess Freya, uniting the two factions as one. Though Odin readily agreed to the marriage, Freya still harbored resentment against him due to the suffering he inflicted on her brother and her people. In the end, though, Freya agreed to the union, believing it would establish peace between the realms. In response to the marriage, the Vanir wished to welcome Odin into their culture. However, the All-Father proceeded to trick them into believing that Freya has abandoned them. As a result of Odin's deception, the Vanir now saw Freya's marriage as a betrayal and a cowardly way to pass judgment on her actions. As an insult to injury, during the wedding at a Vanir shrine in Vanaheim, they wrote the word traitor as a way of denouncing her. Despite this uneasy truce, many felt that it would only be a matter of time before the simmering tensions would eventually break out again and the war would restart. Although she missed her home, Freya was happy in Asgard. She taught her husband magical Vanir spells and even found a new sense of purpose with the birth of her son Baldur. At this point, she was also appointed as Queen of the Valkyries. However, Odin eventually grew paranoid of the Jötnar and their prophetic knowledge of Ragnarok. After Odin was banished from Jotunheim for trying to steal their knowledge, Odin ordered Thor to use Mjolnir to slaughter all the giants across the realms, which caused Freya to begin loathing the Aesir. Later, the All-Father reveals his true nature to Freya and asked her to give him the same protection spell that was bestowed on her son Baldur. When this was refused, he was livid and begins trashing her room, causing Freya to leave him. In his wrath, Odin proceeded to strip her of her Valkyrie wings and her fighting spirit, leaving her unable to raise a hand against anyone, even in self-defense. Odin then proceeded to expel Freya from Asgard, leaving her permanently trapped in Midgard. The realm gates to both Vanaheim and Asgard remain locked for anyone that isn't a Vanir or an Aesir, respectively. After the marriage between Odin and Freya ended, the Aesir re-invaded Vanaheim. Without Freya's leadership, the Vanir were overwhelmed by their numbers and tactics, and most settlements in the realm were obliterated, their ruins then occupied by Einherjar. In particular, the crater in the northern region of Vanaheim had its river blocked, leading to a drought, and most of the Vanir living there were killed during a battle between Laufey and Thor. The surviving Vanir and their supporters either retreated to the jungle to continue the fight under their new leader, Freya, or, in the case of non-combatants, concealed themselves with magic.